Good afternoon and very warm welcome to this GC Insight webinar on joining the dots for local growth plans. It's great to have so many of you here this afternoon, and we're looking forward to a really engaging session over the next hour. I'm Nathan Shoesmith. I'm consultant at GC Insight and Insights Analysis Lead for Growth Flag. Coming up, we've got an excellent panel to talk about this really important topic and something that is really topical at the moment as well, with some of the things that we've seen in the news over the last week or so. A reminder that you can join the conversation on LinkedIn. You can follow us at GC Insight, and you can also ask questions to our panel throughout this session using the Q&A function on Teams. We've got people here from local authorities, combined authorities, central government, and more from across the country. So it's a really great opportunity to really engage with each other, learn lessons from each other, and take stuff forward that will really help drive growth in local places. So before we get started with our panel discussion, why is joining the dots for local growth plans important? Well, we've seen a lot of new strategy, lots of policy direction, but quite often that strategy and policy direction can sit separate in its creation to how it is then delivered on the ground. So we've got teams that focus on economic strategy, we've got teams that focus on skill strategy, we've got separate teams in some cases that focus on employability. And really, we need lots of elements to work together in order to grow local economies. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. And over recent times, there's been a refreshed policy landscape. So for the first time in a while, we've seen really substantial documents such as the modern industrial strategy come out providing direction, as well as backing your business, the government's plan for small and medium-sized enterprises, the trade strategy, as well as the Get Britain Working plans and local growth plans in local places. And as devolution continues, local government reorganisation continues, there's going to be more and more emphasis on many of these plans. Now, many of these plans already are responding to what's going on in the context, impacting local places and local people, but also we're seeing more and more some of these challenges being spotlighted. So just over recent weeks and even recent days, some of these challenges have become more and more documented. So last week we saw the Maple Review released, and that spotlights how nearly 40% of young people in the UK are living in poverty, which is a really significant figure and something that needs lots of attention. We have also seen unemployment hit 5%, and that has been rising over recent times. At the same time, there's now over 1 million young people aged 16 to 24 not in education, employment or training, often referred to as NEETs. And the ability to respond to some of these challenges is also now more fragmented across different places. Some of these policies have carried additional funding streams, some of them have not so much. And we focused previously on that fragmented funding landscape, in particular following the end of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. In the previous session, we looked at this map and looked at how the local growth fund is heavily concentrated in certain areas with mayors, and the Pride in Place programme is also available in some specific neighbourhoods, but there isn't a scheme to fully replace what UK Shared Prosperity Fund or schemes that came before that were offering, particularly around business support, but also on wider aspects. And if you've not seen this map before, if it's new to you, you can scan the QR code or go to gcinsight.co.uk/reimagine to find out more about that context. So today we want to focus on how do we join the dots for local growth plans. Areas are being tasked with developing local growth plans. There is now an imperative to do that for many places. And even where that isn't that imperative, it's something that many local areas are also taking on themselves. And as we look at developing those plans and putting those plans into delivery, it's really important in order to really maximise the impacts that those plans have, that we have joined up teams on different topics, lots of collaboration work and working together in places, but also learning lessons from elsewhere. Joined up data to make sure that approaches to data aren't in silo and that the intelligence that is coming in is used to its greatest effect. And also joined up delivery and feedback loops so that all of these can work together to make sure that the dots really do join up and you can have more informed decisions and better impacts for local places. So without any further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Lauren Newby, Director at GC Insight, who's going to take us through today's panel.
Thank you, Nathan, for a great introduction to our session today. I'm Lauren Newby, Director at GC Insight. I have some 25 years of working in consultancy right across the economic development spectrum with a keen interest in economic strategy, labour markets and business competitiveness. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion today aimed at joining the dots for local growth plans. I'm very pleased to be joined by all of our attendees and excellent panellists. So to kick us off, I would like to invite our panellists, first of all, to briefly introduce yourselves and tell us a little about your role and your work. So if I can come to you, first of all, Adrian.
Thank you, Lauren. Afternoon, everybody. I'm Adrian Nolan, and I head up economic policy at Liverpool City Region Combined Authority. That's essentially quite a wide portfolio of many different things, but the most relevant to this conversation today, I've had on the development of the LCR growth plan recently, and I've been previous to the CA here. I've worked in other public policy roles, think tank world, and in consultancy.
Thank you, Adrian. Great to see you on the call today. Looking forward to hearing more from you. Over to you next, Ben. You're a former colleague of mine and also a valued collaborator. A little bit more about yourself for the purpose of the audience.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, so I'm a labour market and economic advisor, and I'm the founder of Ascham Grindal. Essentially, I work with investors, developers, and public sector leaders to turn growth ambitions into outcomes that land locally. Essentially, my focus is on how labour markets really work, not how we assume they work. I help clients test whether their growth plans are deliverable in practice, try and understand workforce constraints and kind of build a stronger connection between the investment, the skills and the local economic outcomes they're trying to deliver. Before setting up Ascham Grindal, I spent over 15 years working in and alongside local government. I covered multiple portfolios and areas, and yes, I am a long-standing collaborator with GC Insight, so I'm very pleased to be here.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, so I think what we'll do now is just really move into diving into our discussion today. What I'm going to do, apologies. I can see now that we are now joined by Sara. Sara, if you can hear me, are you able to join the call? Lovely. And introduce yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me this lunchtime. So I am Sara Gaskell. I'm manager of the Lancashire Skills and Employment Hub, which is part of the Lancashire Combined County Authority. And I'm responsible for coordinating and managing multiple related skills and employment projects across Lancashire, balancing a range of work streams to make sure the aims of our strategic framework is met. We have 4 key themes: future workforce, inclusive workforce, skilled and productive workforce, and social value, which forms a major part of what we do. So I support the development of Lancashire skills and employment policies and strategy, taking into consideration, Ben's favourite subject, labour market information, and is there a need to do what we do? Are we doing it in the right place? So joining the dots really to make sure that we maximise the impact of skills and employment initiatives across Lancashire to support economic growth.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us today. It's certainly interesting times in Lancashire, the new combined authority and local government reorganisation on the horizon as well. So looking forward to hearing more. Okay, so I'm going to kick off in the same order as the introductions, just to invite some feedback to some specific questions that I have in the first instance for each of you in turn. So the expectation from government is that local growth plans provide a joined up approach across policy. So coming to you, Adrian, first of all, having recently led the development of the Liverpool City Region Growth Plan, how do you make sure that a long-term economic strategy genuinely shapes what happens on the ground across a range of areas such as business support, skills and employability, which may often be managed by different teams or organisations?
Lauren, yeah, so in reality, obviously, this is really hard. Anyone who says otherwise is clearly lying. I think ultimately success comes from creating a clear line of sight from long-term vision through to day-to-day delivery. It's kind of obvious, but so people understand both the contribution and how success is measured. And that's what turns obviously strategy from a document into a tool for action, rather than just simply a statement of intent. For our growth plan, I suppose we're helped a bit by having a long-term national economic strategy through the industrial strategy to pin a chunk of our plan on, and then having the growth plan accepted as a tool for decision making for our city region, which is the why. And now we have things like the integrated settlement and further devolution to support the how. That all supports obviously sharpen the focus, support prioritisation and delivery. But just a few maybe key thoughts on this from my side. I could go on all day about it, so I'll just focus on a few key things. I think the main thing really is about clarity and alignment of priorities. So they're understood and they're shared across all organisations involved in delivery. So clearly having that, set of shared, system-wide economic priorities that all of our partners understand. And they've got to be embedded in a live strategic framework, that actively shapes decisions and not just a static plan. It's those static plans that just end up on the shelf, isn't it, really? So this is where it's really important to have that sort of a live document, if you like. And also the simplicity and messaging is really critical to buy in there as well. Just a couple of points locally on this from our reflections. I think, strategic priorities we developed in the growth plan, we've obviously, we developed those and tested them extensively from the start through extensive stakeholder consultation, collectively developed across also policy, investment and delivery. So the growth plan's not something just done over here by policy, it's something that's organisational wide and bringing all of our partners together. So that means when colleagues at all levels are starting any piece of work, I think we're trying to make sure that the first question they ask is, how does this support LGP delivery? That's the first thing that comes to mind. And as a result of the LGP and the buy-in, certainly locally and across the organisation now how it's embedded, it's setting a direction for work streams and reviews across several areas of delivery, including like say business support, employment support, look at skills where we've got our local skills improvement plan which has been developed. We've been working hard to make sure that the growth plan is absolutely central to that, and that in theory then will ensure that the line of sight from delivery to strategic priorities are fully adhered to. And then I mentioned simplicity and messaging as well. We've got an overarching productivity mission in our growth plan. We try to translate that into simple terms for teams and partners that don't consider themselves close to economics. And the sort of the abstract language that people like me always use. So there's something here about how that supports buy-in, action, progress, and minimises the abstract nature of strategies. And of course, there's something about strategy to action. It's got to be practical, hasn't it? So measurable. So it's about clearly defining those outcomes, mapping how delivery functions across areas like skills, business support, employability, contribute. Otherwise, if you don't do that, then teams are just going to revert to business as usual, and it sort of just sits on the shelf. So we've worked hard to ensure that's the case throughout the growth plan, making sure it's action orientated, contains areas of clear focus, actions for different teams and partners to act on and refer to. Other key element is obviously really governance and accountability. So, shared objectives, joint planning, common performance frameworks are really essential, aligning organisations, aligning partners in terms of delivery and enabling that collective accountability. So again, we've in LCR undertaken extensive work on a core LCR CA outcomes framework that supports both our LGP but also corporate plans. So our LGP is now a core part of the different directorate delivery plans, so trying to make sure it's embedded in our corporate governance. So making sure, that we're collectively accountable for economic outcomes, collaboration becomes much more likely. One of the key things, obviously, is about investment. How do you align the investment, funding and commissioning? Because that's got to reinforce the strategy, and that flows down to delivery on the ground. I think from our point of view, what we've done in LCR, one of the key things we've done recently, we had the growth plan. We've also just last month published our refreshed CA investment strategy. So that was done collaboratively through our investment and delivery directorate. It's quite intentionally quite soon after our LGP publication, as it's an important implementation mechanism across different themes that will drive delivery. But of course, also in this space as well, we've got integrated settlement, all links to that. So we're quite fortunate in that space now in terms of aligning with, making sure that delivery on the ground and priorities are all aligning. I think things like the integrated settlement, refreshed investment strategies that are aligned directly with the growth plan for us was really, really, really important. There's a lot around data. I won't go into data because but it's an obvious one really in terms of shared evidence base. I was just going to finish on leadership and culture. It might seem quite obvious, but consistent leadership and cultural collaboration really important for making this that system-wide working the norm. And the development of the LGP has been hugely helpful for us at LCRCA with backing at all levels throughout the process. Both within the organisation, but also key business groups like our Business and Enterprise Board and others to have that senior buy-in. And that's the result of a lot of time put through development of the strategy from its earliest inception through to publication and now collective delivery. So the intention throughout all of this really is to ensure the strategy starts to really drive behaviours across the system that ultimately shifts the dial in economic performance. But system change takes time, doesn't it? And it's really key. So that's all I'll say on that one. And just a final point: role of the mayor and the CA for us really critical to underpin all this and all of the evolution powers and more that are coming our way to help delivery.
That's great, Adrian. Really insightful, a lot of learnings, I'm sure, for people listening on the call. And I can see there is some hands up, so we will be coming back to open up for questions later in the session. But really insightful, lots of learnings, and certainly lots of very clear takeaways in terms of having that really strong strategic framework, that clear governance structure and leadership and so forth. And that clear focus in terms of outcomes as well, and that journey, that trajectory that you're on. So lots for us to come back to there. But just moving on, and I think picking up on some of the points that you've just made, that local growth plans need to provide that single integrated framework showing how sector priorities drive skill needs, skills provision supports labour market demands, employability support connects residents to growth sectors and so forth. So Ben, one for you. From your work on labour market skills and local economic growth, where do you most often see disconnects between growth ambitions and labour market reality? And what should places do differently to build plans that are both credible and deliverable?
A nice, simple, easy question there, Lauren. Thank you. I mean, like Adrian, I could talk about this for ages, in the same way as Adrian did a really good job of covering a heck of a lot of territory in a very succinct way. So I'll try and do the same. I was thinking about this, and to me, the most common disconnect is that we often have a bit of a binary division. The growth ambition is kind of treated as like a sector strategy problem. We must grow these sectors, either the IS8 or other sectors that we've got in our area. And delivery is often a labour market problem, and we don't really join the two up. And I think this just reflects the system we have. We don't talk about labour markets at a regional or local level in the same breath that we talk about growth and skills. We talk about growth and skills because those are the levers that have historically and at the moment are part of what we do at a non-national level in these areas. But I think that the recurring gaps that kind of distinction generates is the bit that I want to talk through, because I think we'll come back to this a bit in the questions. I think, and this isn't to say it's unimportant, but I think there is just an over-reliance on skills supply as the answer. So many plans assume that if we just train enough people, growth will happen. But labour markets just don't work like that. What matters is kind of allocation and transition. So that's how do you allocate a group of workers, and also how do those workers through their working lives move through progression routes, change between sectors, respond to life events, and so on and so forth. It's not just skills, it's people. And it's about how people move between those sectors, roles, and places. And often we kind of don't build into our thinking around this. How do we make that as frictionless as possible? There's a lot, don't get me wrong, there is a lot of ambition and desire to do the right things. The problem is that by focusing on skills supply, we tend to miss out on the other elements that will bring better outcomes, in my opinion, at least. The reason for that is the fact that we have to commission and do things in response to regulations, law, and all of those other things. This isn't about areas not knowing that this is the problem. It's about areas being as much constrained by the market for public policy as anything else. I think a second factor is a lack of realism about how labour demand actually plays out locally. Plans will often state how many jobs will be created or would like to be created, but very rarely kind of go who will do them. We kind of just assume that local people will reallocate into these new sectors. But we don't often describe how people will get into those roles. We just again say it will be done with skills. And we don't actually really describe how the growth ambition interacts with the existing demand in the current labour force. So, you know, depending which historian you talk to, the service sector in the UK economy has been the biggest sector for employment either from about 1880 or from about 1930. And there are many PhDs that argue about this. I'm not going to go there. But the point I'm making is we tend to have this mentality that we only became a service economy fairly recently. That's not true. And I think we forget often that the majority of people work in service sectors, and there is also an incredible breadth in those service sectors. There's not a large pool of labour just waiting for us to create jobs in advanced manufacturing for them. So I think sometimes that realism is absent. And again, it's not intentional. I think it just reflects the way we have to produce the strategies that we're asked for at a local level. I think the third thing is we treat labour markets as static when they're a dynamic system. AI is perhaps the current example of this. There is a lot of focus on exposure, who's going to lose their job, whose job's going to be changed, is it the reason why we've got so many young people who are not working? But the evidence on actual exposure doesn't directly translate into job losses at this moment in time, but nor does it necessarily translate into opportunities either. What we're missing is that it depends. It's about adoption. It's about demand. It's about how people and firms adapt to that. And that will vary massively across the country, as it does with any technology. But we also tend to discount other factors. So everybody will get very obsessed with AI, but we've forgotten about working from home. We've forgotten about the cost of transport, i.e. when we're talking about young people, do we talk about the extraordinary cost of insurance for young drivers? As the step parent of two young people who are trying to buy cars and pay for them to go to study, to go to work, where's the reflection on what that means in a lot of cases? Now, the point is that should every strategy talk about insurance for young people? No. But the point is that it's an example of the fact that labour markets are not just driven by skills. The other thing is, I suppose, is we will also talk about the numbers. Sometimes we talk about the volume, the lump of people. So how many people are unemployed, how many people are NEETs. But we very rarely talk about how long are people in those situations. And relatively speaking, if the length of time somebody is NEET is actually as important as how many are NEETs. I'm not trying to discount the fact we have got a NEET problem. I've done enough work on Get Britain Working plans to know that it's a massive issue. But the problem is that we lose sight of the fact that there's a big difference between a stock and a flow. So Lauren wanted me to kind of come up with how we fix all of these problems and solve all the world's issues. very, very quickly, I think we need to do three kind of practical things. One, we need to move from jobs created to jobs delivered. So we need to stop talking about the creation of jobs and focus instead about who secures those jobs. What's the workforce availability in the area? What are the transition pathways? What's the competing demand? I think the second area is a kind of focus on transitions, not just that supply of new jobs. So under what conditions can we realistically expect to move people into these new roles that are in our growth ambition? We're going to build a big advanced manufacturing site in the new industrial zone. That's great. Who's going to work there? And that should be, it's not about saying these are all jobs for local people, but this is about being clear. What is it that we're expecting the outcome to be? Because at the moment, the outcome is just jobs created. And I think we need to get a bit more precision into that. Who do we transition from where? And what does that mean for those other sectors that are losing workers? Because it creates a business support need to enable those sectors that potentially are going to need to lose workers to help them to become as productive, better, in order to free up the workforce for us to retrain, to invest in those export-orientated sectors that are so critical to future productivity. And I did slip a little bit there into the economics language, but to put that very simply, if we want good people to work in good places, we need them to leave the jobs they're currently in. So we need to work out what we do about those spare jobs. And my final point is really treat the strategy as a system, not a set of documents. This builds on what Adrian was saying, but growth plans, local skills improvement plans, local plans themselves, investment pipelines, all of it, they all interact, but they all interact around people in labour markets. And I think we just need to take a bit more of a whole system view of it, not just in terms of the delivery from a combined authority or a local authority perspective, but actually from how does all of this combine together to shape the labour market we will have 5, 10, 15 years from now.
Thanks, Ben. Wow, a lot to unpick in there. And yes, so certainly it's a holy grail, isn't it, of achieving that skills supply and demand equilibrium. Really good to touch on some of those enablers and some of those system factors. I'm going to come to you now, Sara. I'm very conscious in terms of a lot of what we've talked about here is around the importance of strong local growth plans needing to really demonstrate those clear links between economic strategy, skills plans, business support, innovation, activity, that kind of whole system approach that Ben has just alluded to. And given your experience in leading skills and employment policy in Lancashire, what does it take in practice to join the dots across local labour market intelligence, skills provision and employment support so that people and businesses can experience a more coherent system? Sorry, Sara, could you unmute, please?
Sorry, that's technical failure there from me. It's a really interesting and challenging, and it's ongoing challenging question, isn't it, this? I think, you need to start with that labour market information and that data and the research piece. So it's about making sure that provision, whatever it is, whether it's nationally prescribed provision or whether it's locally designed and delivered provision, is hitting the right mark. So it's hitting the right mark for the residents. So are we hitting the residents that we need to hit? We've spoken about need this morning. Also, that research piece on why have we got growing need? Why have we got sort of 25% of our workforce sat in the economically inactive group? What are the reasons behind this? What are the barriers to these people getting involved in the labour market to support that inclusive growth piece? So I suppose the research and data intelligence and using that to really inform strategy going forward. And then once we've got that and we've sort of either landed on nationally prescribed programmes or designed and delivered focused programmes for the region, it's about how then we bring people along with us. So, how we go from using that labour market intelligence to market engagement and make sure that people are engaged across the sector, whether that be employers, whether that be delivery partners, making sure that we have the engagement from residents also. And then once the delivery is up and running, that the fact that there is the community of practice. So we glean on good practice within Lancashire. So for many years now, we've had something called the Adult Skills Forum, and this goes back to ESF days when, you know, everybody was quite rich with skills for both employment and for business skills, and, you know, local authority areas and providers and you know, various other organisations saying, well, we don't actually know who's delivering what where. So we brought together the Adult Skills Forum, and this was the delivery partners across all of the provision to make sure that everybody was interlinked, that the referral processes were happening. So I suppose it's that market engagement, gleaning feedback from people, from our communities of practice, and really can make sure that you know, whatever project lands and links, doesn't just land and then go off in its own trajectory, but links to the other provision. In Lancashire, we have something called the Lancashire Skills Escalator, and we're very keen to make sure that people progress. And we've mentioned, you know, that people have to have good jobs. And a good job for me is entirely different to what a good job for Adrian or Ben might look like, you know, but it's about good jobs so that people get the job, we don't have the churn, and that they stay in jobs. But that could be starting from an entry-level job, and that people are then offered the skills initiative to progress them through, to progress into other roles, to open up those entry roles at the bottom of organisations. And I suppose this also goes through into the piece of activity is, you know, that economic growth, and where there are new and growing sectors within areas. So that, you know, Lancashire is very lucky to be the new home of the National Cyber Force, which opens up the cyber corridor, Manchester and further afield, joining links. Now, we've started in primary school engaging our young people in cyber fairy tales so that they know what jobs in cyberforce are. So it's that supporting the future, that next generation of people, so they can make informed choices about the right job that they do, and making sure that that all has a pathway, and that the dots are all joined there, so that that feeds in the curriculum. And I suppose it's for businesses, when we're talking about economic growth, we you know, the big business focus here is, I think businesses are very, there's always a big ask in businesses. We need you to join this group, we need you to do this group, we need you to take apprentices on, we need you to look, you know, there'll be more and more requests on businesses. And we are lucky in Lancashire, we have the Lancashire Skills Pledge, where, you know, we've got hundreds of businesses pledged to one of 9 pledges to support activity within the region, and we are able then to give them impartial advice and guidance on what's going on, because we need to make sure we have a clear, cohesive message in what is available for businesses. I suppose the only other thing is, you know, collaboration in Lancashire we call our superpower. And by bringing people together, and by landing projects appropriately, linking them into the network of other opportunities in Lancashire, really makes a consistent message across the region.
Great, thank you. Lots of good practice there. Certainly in the face of lots of disruptors as well, including, you know, the sort of that evolving policy landscape and numerous initiatives coming forward, often nationally led and commissioned, which can contribute to a complex system. I'm sure we'll circle back to some of those points. So let's open up now to a wider panel discussion, if we may. I have a series of questions, keen for any of our panelists to come forward and share your thoughts on these. So let's kick off with a first question for you, which is, why do skills, employability and business support still often get planned and delivered in silos? And what are the most practical ways places can start breaking those barriers down? Would anyone like to go first? It feels like it's somewhat build, Sara. Yeah, Sara.
Yeah, I think, you know, following from what I've just said, is the fact that, you know, we always use really an intelligence base to make sure that what we are commissioning is appropriate for the region. But then policy interjects in this, isn't it? And there are nationally designed programmes, and it's how then they either link in or compete with what's on the ground locally. So it is about integration and joining the dots, and really making it happen locally. So I think sometimes there is that local offer and then the national policy interjection which comes in. So it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because not always the two meet in the middle, I suppose, is what I would say.
That's great. Well, I can see Ben and then Adrian are going to come in on this point. So lots to be said in this space. Over to you, Ben.
I'll be brief. I think for me, we just also have to accept sometimes these are funded, commissioned and measured separately in silos nationally. And I think sometimes we need to remember there's a non-combined strategic authority view on this, that there's still lots of duplication at a national level that means that a lot of the delivery will still be in silos. You know, we don't have a situation where DFE checks the policy it's about to do for FE colleges with DWP in terms of its insights around access to work and so on and so forth. So we just need to accept to a certain amount that there is silos and some of those will remain. I think the response to that, and I would say this because it's kind of my business, but I'd start with a labour market view, but to kind of link together your demand, your supply and your flows of people around and use that as the basis for starting to build joint commissioning around outcomes. And that's starting to happen actually in the combined authorities and in the strategic authority. And it also does happen to a certain extent in local authorities. It's not easy. And as Adrian said at the start, none of this is easy. And anybody who says that it is isn't aware of the reality. But to my mind, there's an acceptance of the silo, but also a recognition that you can do something about that. To me, that's starting with that labour market view and working up from there in terms of outcomes.
Right. Adrian, do you want to build on that point?
Yeah, actually, I think some similar points I was going to make, I won't cover again, but I think, yeah, I do agree that you'll never eliminate silos entirely, will you? And, you know, but you can build strong sort of links and bridges between them. I think ultimately the system's orientated around different users, isn't it? And language. So skills is around, let's say, your learners, business support about firms, and then, you know, employability is about people seeking work, job seekers. And, you know, those groups are all interdependent, aren't they? But those services are all designed separately. So there's some significant issues in the system. As I say, it will take time to bridge them. But I totally agree with what, you know, what's been said there. I think maybe from a strategic example, you know, if you think of what we're trying to do with the new local skills improvement plans, you know, there's the second round of these, where, you know, it's co-designed from the very start. You know, in LCR, I've been working to bring, you know, employers and their needs and forming skills policy through that. So it's a demand-led piece. It's being led by our, you know, Chamber of Commerce and, you know, employer representative body, and central to that's the convening role of the CAs and bringing in the growth plan. So the whole demand and supply piece, trying to bring it together in one space. And also within that as well is the employability side as well. So you think about the system, and we think about our LSIP is, you know, you've got your LSIP, you've got the growth plan, and we've got, you know, the Get LCR working plan in terms of those key strategic pieces and all the activity that happens underneath them coming together in one space. Great in theory, isn't it? I mean, in practical terms, it might be down the track where you start to see some results, but it's a starting point anyway, in terms of, certainly from my perspective, from a policy, maybe a high level policy view, in terms of going forward. And I think there's the right thinking going on strategically, as I say, but it's where how that filters through the system, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we've probably covered quite well the sort of links between strategy moving into delivery. I would just like to sort of touch on data, if I may, a bit more detail, and really just getting some thoughts in terms of what role should up-to-date data and tools play in creating that more joined-up system, and how can places avoid accessing lots of data without using it to make better decisions? I don't know, maybe Ben, that's one for you to start us off with.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there's in a strange way there's no shortage of data, but often we're not quite in the position where it's reducing the ambiguities that we're trying to unwind. So I think for me, if you were going to be at a fundamental level, what you're trying to do with the data is get a set of answers to a set of questions, which I think is where we often don't start with. There's often a rush to what do the numbers tell us? And we need to remember that often the numbers are only answering a question that maybe somebody else asked quite a long time ago. You know, the way that national data is collected, it's a fundamentally an accounting exercise often from a time when knowing the volume of people who were inactive or unemployed was the data that anybody needed. Whereas at a local and regional level, we need more precision in that. We need to know, well, we need to know a bit more about these people. Who are they? Where are they going? What are their needs? And so on and so forth. And at the moment, we have to infer this often from various data sources and different types of dashboards and all sorts of things that are being brought together. So at a fundamental level, the role of data in all of this is about trying to reduce that complexity and reduce that ambiguity and be able to provide you with the information to answer a set of questions. That set of questions you need to develop as part of your strategy development. You need to know what is it you're getting the data to answer. And I think it's then about how that data starts to shape, and it should be shaping, the commissioning intention that follows out of that. And I think sometimes, and again, it's probably more related to the issues that we have with how these sorts of services are commissioned, but the Get Britain Working agenda and the development of local plans, there has been a lot of focus upon the data that's being collected. We don't have good, consistent, localized data for the different cohorts of needs. We have the data for 16-17, but there's a big gap around 18 to 24. And it has to be sort of inferred from lots of different sources in order to get a rough idea of, well, how many people does that include? Who are they? Where are they? And I think where we're moving to is a recognition, and it's where data tools that local authorities and private providers can buy everywhere is starting to try and fill that gap. But I think there needs to be a national discussion about actually how do we start to move in that direction. Skills England's doing some of that and they're doing a good job, but I think it's incumbent on the combined authorities to be kind of leading that data question and just saying, ultimately, we're trying to reduce the ambiguity and not just create a load of dashboards for performance management.
Yeah, great, thanks, Ben. We've got 5 minutes before I want to take any questions from the audience. So that's just a reminder for people listening to make use of the Q&A function to post any questions that you may have. But in the meantime, I'm going to pose the same question to each of our panelists, which is, if you could change one thing to improve that alignment between economic strategy, skills, employability and business support in local growth plans, what would it be? So I don't know if someone's at the ready, or I'll pinpoint. Go on, Adrian, you go first.
Right. For me, I suppose focusing short-term decisions on long-term outcomes to drive alignment. Because that forces the whole system then, I suppose, to work towards the same end goal, if you like, rather than the short-term outputs, which is often designed to do. And that obviously that's driven by renewed focus on systems thinking. I think at the moment, decisions are driven by sort of, often short-term targets, and they can pull, skills, employability, business support can pull in all different directions, can't it? So if they're tested against longer-term outcomes, like, I don't know, sustained employment, sector growth, whatever, I think I encourage everyone to go towards the same place and actually start thinking, intervention, and you can design interventions that connect better. So you're looking to align the system, I suppose, by shifting the question from what can I achieve now or the next 6 months to a year to what makes a difference in 5 to 10 years. And that's where I suppose devolution comes in as well, all the work we're doing there, and think of fiscal devolution, all these things that's happening now in the landscape. We're perhaps at a strategic inflection point for this. So that's my view on it.
Yeah, that's great, Adrian. That sort of takes us back to your introduction, really, and how you talked about the kind of hierarchy, that framework of strategies and policies within your organisation and how that's supporting the process. Sara?
Yeah, Lancashire is just on its first rung of the ladder as far as devolution is concerned. And we've been looking at devolution for some time now. So further devolution, we've only just started, but more devolution because we're a combined county authority. So we have the ASF funds landing in August. We've done a considerable amount of work on our strategic skills plans. And Ben, you'd be glad to say it starts with data, but a layering of data. Lancashire has designed and delivered the Lancashire Data Observatory, so we have got one version of the truth. It's available on the Lancashire Skills and Employment Hub website, so partners can use it. We're all talking the same language, but we're layering it. Used as a background then to gain funds for, public health, for our economic inactivity research piece. So again, layering of data down to actually then asking for that feedback. So this is what the data is telling us. Why? What else do we need? The devil's in the detail with all this. So speaking to businesses, speaking to residents. So really unpicking that data. And then, using that to inform approaches. So I suppose for me, it would be further devolution. We will want to be able to have local solutions. We know what's going on in Lancashire. We know what's needed in Lancashire. The Get Lancashire Working Plan. We've got 12 local authorities, 2 unitaries and an overarching county council at the moment. And so some of those regions in Lancashire are on 84% employment rates. But I know that in that region, there are streets or areas that are at 64%. So further devolution for us would be great, so that we can have those real local solutions that land well locally, that can be promoted locally, and then could feed back in, and we can track it then with our labour market information and data observatory. So I suppose local funding support local initiatives which meet the needs of residents and businesses, and that really underpins economic growth.
Right. Ben, anything to add?
I know this would sound really odd for a labour market consultant to say, but I think an essential labour market framework would be really quite good for most local growth plans. Something that just simply goes away from the ambition of how many jobs to who does the jobs, how do they move into them, and what are the scenarios and the conditions that are required to make that happen. I think we also need to remember that there is just not necessarily enough people for all of the growth in all of the sectors that we keep identifying. So we probably need to be able to answer the question of who's going to do that job. And for me, that should be a mandatory part of local growth plans.
Right. Okay. So we've got a number of questions from the audience to consider. We've got 10 minutes to go. So in the final part of our webinar today, I'd just like to share a selection of those. So kicking off with the first one. How do you ensure delivery teams are spending more time working with businesses and other teams rather than managing internal processes or admin? So, I don't know, Sara, is that one for you to start with? I'm just wondering if that might be well suited to your experiences at the cold face of all of this.
It's project management. People are employed to employer engagement, learner engagement. If you're going to run a project well and you're going to engage people onto it or businesses onto it and get the whole thing working well and contributing to economic activity and growth, you'll need to be working. So we realise that a lot of projects are heavy in the paperwork and the bureaucracy side, but it's a matter of we have to come up with ways to make sure that people are able to go out and do the job and engage with businesses and make sure it works on the ground, as opposed to be sitting in the corner of an office somewhere, writing about what we're doing rather than going out and actually doing what we're doing. I don't know if that answers the question, but
no, that's really helpful. I don't know, Adrian, is there anything that you would add from a sort of Liverpool City region perspective, and how you've been working to align systems and try and ensure that you're maximising delivery of those teams?
Partly it's about the maturity of the organisations, isn't there? And when CAs have been around for a while, they start to mature those processes and systems in place and getting the right level, the right people in, and they're aligned to doing the right job. So you've got, like, say, your project management functions, the people who are paid and designed to design those pieces of work and make sure that that internal bureaucracy is being addressed and being sorted and being looked after. It's really, really important that it is. Whilst at the same time, you have those key business growth teams and employer engagement teams going out there and doing the job they need to do, and those two things link together accordingly. Again, not perfect anywhere, is it? But I think as organisations mature, you're able to do that. And I say it's about different roles, clearly defined roles, and having those processes in place, and just making sure that the bureaucratic angle doesn't go straight too far and actually impact on, or the impact that you are having as an organisation.
So another question really focuses on how do you adapt plans and delivery to help really drive the most immediate impacts, and recognising that this doesn't always perfectly align, for example, with sectors in growth plans. I think I can see Ben smiling, so I'm wondering if this is one for you to start to pick up on, Ben. But we hear a lot, don't we, in our field of work around growth sectors, the IS8 and so forth, and nevertheless we sort of recognise the importance of taking that wider view, the importance of the foundational economy, for example, the importance of creating those entry-level jobs. So I think very much sort of thinking about the immediate impacts that we need to drive to deliver against these outcomes that we seek. How do we make sure that they speak to each other? We adapt those plans and that delivery.
So I think the practical thing is to recognise what the problem is you're trying to address, which I know sounds like a very consultant way of answering the question, so bear with me for just a brief moment. One of the things we keep getting hung up on is, are we trying to improve productivity or are we trying to create jobs? Now, it's not this complete trade-off. Obviously, improving productivity will create jobs, but it will create jobs over the longer term. Whereas creating jobs as the ambition doesn't necessarily give you the same ability to invest in all of the bits that create the productivity that will actually create wealth and improve the place in a different way. So I think the short-term thing is, what are you trying to do? Now, I would personally encourage places to go for the low-hanging fruit around productivity and stop worrying necessarily about, well, how do we create entry-level jobs and how do we do this? There is a thing here about recognizing that it's not all about skills, but it's about things that are linked back to skills in the labour market. How do we support businesses to have better leadership and management? How do we bring forward the financing and the resources that firms need to invest in that new piece of equipment that's going to allow them to get more market share? How are we going to help high street retail to be more efficient, so actually they don't need to try and hire their way out of a problem? And actually, how are we starting to approach those things? So to me, there's the thing of the immediate delivery is almost going, we need to focus on the productivity across all of our sectors. We've got a local growth plan which is about focused development in a set of key sectors. Personally, I think all the local growth plans should focus on fewer sectors. They all seem to be kind of competing with themselves to meet every single IS8 sector going. I'd much rather than pick 2 or 3 and go, those are actually our priorities and here's why we're doing that. But for everything else, the wider approach should be about those fundamentals, and those need to be about how you work with employee representative organisations like your chambers of commerce, your federations of small business, how you work with those to really go, we've got to do this, which is improve productivity. We think the solution is this, this, and this, and we're going to shift business support to do those things. And actually, that's what the focus is going to be. I think I've answered the question there, Lauren. I'm sure you'll tell me if I haven't.
No, that's great. Thank you. I've just got an eye on time. wondering if I could just take a quick answer to a final question. Trying to work out what the question says. Would doubling the devolved adult skills funding to local authority level help to create the delivery that businesses need? So any quick responses on that? Ben's got another smile on his face.
I'm going to say something that's probably going to be slightly controversial. No, would be the answer. I think doubling the adult skills fund should happen, absolutely, and it should be devolved. But I think we're missing the point. It's not about the amount of money, although more money is needed. It's about how those then commission the programs. If you were going to double the ASF, it should come with the provision of which parts of the skills level you're going to target, and how local areas then make sure it's very clear that they're going to link those levels with specific priorities in key sectors. So that would be my response. I don't think doubling it would necessarily make a figure of difference. It would help to help more people, but in terms of driving that outcome, I think you need to be clear about what it is you're going to use it for at a local level. So it goes to Sarah's point. There's a complete difference in what she will need to do with her resource versus what Adrian need to do with that resource in Liverpool.
Okay, well, I'd love to keep the conversation going, but I'm very mindful that we're nearly out of time. There's obviously been lots of other really interesting questions in the chat, so we need to take those away and reflect further on those, recognising, some really important topics been highlighted today. But what I want to do first, before I hand back to Nathan, is just give huge thanks to our panellists for joining the webinar today. It's been a really interesting and insightful discussion. So over to you, Nathan, to wrap us up.
Thank you, Lauren, and also thank you to Ben, Sarah, and Adrian for a really insightful session there. Thank you all so much for joining us. Hope you found it an interesting session. Reminder that this session has been recorded, so it will be available to watch on demand if you missed any of it. GC Insight is a social enterprise. We provide analysis tools and know-how to help clients make bigger positive impact across a range of areas, including get Britain working, economic strategies and more. If you're interested in finding anything more out about us, please do get in touch after today's session. But it's now 1 o'clock, so I will leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. Hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.